The auditorium lights dimmed, and in that charged silence, a single phrase cut through the tension like a dagger. Senator John Kennedy stood at the podium, the microphone catching every syllable, as he delivered the line that would ripple far beyond the marble walls. "Your credibility is not for sale, madam." At that moment, all eyes were on Representative Jasmine Crockett, her heart pounding, her career hanging in the balance. A murmur rose from the gallery as Jasmine's colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, and the stunned hush settled in like a storm about to break. She felt time slow as those words echoed, a public reckoning that would come to define her legacy. The hush broke, cameras flashed, and Jasmine's world shifted in an instant. She realized that beneath the spotlight, even the strongest facade could crack, and her journey took a turn she never expected. Jasmine had come to Washington with a fire in her soul and a promise to her community, to give voice to those unheard. She grew up in a small Texas town where the library's books were outdated and opportunity was scarce, but she found solace in words and conviction in justice. She worked her way through law school, became a civil rights attorney, and then won her election against a longtime incumbent. She carried hope with her, wearing it like armor, while the halls of power expected her to wear a different dress. But power has an appetite of its own, and in Washington the winds can shift without warning. Senator Kennedy, a veteran known for his eloquence and ruthless precision, recognized in Jasmine both an ally and a threat. Their paths crossed early. Jasmine determined to change the system. Kennedy committed to maintaining its order, and when that collision came, the result was unforgettable. For weeks leading up to the moment, Jasmine had navigated a political maze. She faced pressure from interest groups, whispers of compromise, and the burden of representing her district while staying true to reform. Her staff worked around the clock. Constituents demanded results, and inside the chamber, she fought battles both public and unseen. One evening, she sat in her office, tears streaming as she read an email from a young constituent whose family had lost their home. The weight of responsibility crushed her. She asked herself, was I strong enough? Could I be the change I promised? Meanwhile, Kennedy watched from across the aisle, his steely gaze acknowledging her fire and calculating the threat she posed to his established alliances. Then came the hearing. Jasmine stood, poised and determined, ready to challenge the system's complacency. She cited her district's struggles, brought forward data, testimonies, personal stories. The air buzzed with expectation. Senator Kennedy rose, his suit crisp, his expression calm. He complimented her on the passion, then asked a question that cut deeper than policy. At what point do you answer for yourself? When Jasmine hesitated, the cameras caught the moment. Then he lowered his voice for everyone to hear. Your credibility is not for sale, madam. The gallery gasped. Jasmine felt her heart drop as if the floor beneath her gave way. She realized in that instant her career could unravel with the public's perception shifting in a single line. In the days that followed, the media frenzy was relentless. Headlines ran wild. Kennedy floors Crockett, Senator's line sinks rising star, and Jasmine's name trended with a mix of sympathy, criticism, and gossip. Friends called. Advisors convened. Opponents sharpened their knives. Jasmine felt the isolation acutely. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, seeing someone she no longer recognized. Exhausted, wounded, but still alive. She reached out to her mentor, a retired congresswoman who told her, "They can take your platform, but they can't take your voice unless you let them." That advice sparked a flicker of hope. Jasmine realized this fight wasn't only about winning policy. It was about reclaiming who she was when the spotlight burned hottest, facing. The challenge meant more than surviving the scandal. It meant owning the narrative. Jasmine held town halls in her district, not shining lights, but honest conversations. She heard stories of families living paycheck to paycheck, of children skipping meals, of mothers and fathers praying for an education that could break the cycle. She spoke of accountability, not just in others, but in herself. On one morning, she arrived late to a meeting and apologized in front of the room, admitting she'd let the hearing consume her. The room leaned in. That vulnerability built trust. Meanwhile, Senator Kennedy watched from afar as Jasmine reconnected with the people who believed in her. From day one, the ones whose names weren't in newspapers, but whose lives mattered all the same. Behind closed doors, Jasmine navigated internal party battles. Some offered to quiet the controversy. Others whispered that she should step down. She weighed their words. She remembered the little girl reading by lamplight, the grown woman standing before Congress, and she refused to vanish quietly. She drafted legislation targeting housing instability and educational inequality, policies she'd fought for long before the hearing moment. She connected with allies across party lines, built a coalition of grassroots organizers, educators, healthcare workers. Each meeting reminded her, this wasn't about the snarky line on camera, it was about justice. And when Kennedy offered her a chance to co-sponsor a bill, she recognized the moment, an olive branch or a trap. She accepted, on her terms. The final showdown came during a floor vote on Jasmine's bill, a measure to expand affordable housing in underserved districts. The chamber filled with tension as speeches echoed. Senator Kennedy took the floor, his voice firm but softer than before. I stand with reform, he said, but I stand also with integrity. He paused and looked toward Jasmine. She met his gaze, steady. Then he added, your credibility is not for sale, but your commitment can change everything. The gallery erupted into applause. Jasmine felt tears as she rose to speak. My credibility was never for sale. It was my vow to you. The bill passed. The moment didn't erase the hearing or the hurt, but it signaled a turning point. In that hour, Jasmine reclaimed more than policy. She reclaimed purpose. When the smoke cleared, Jasmine stepped outside the Capitol into the dusk. The lights of the city glowed and she breathed deeply. She thought of everyone who'd worked, waited, believed. She thought of the line that shook her world and how she turned it into a fire that lit the way. She knew scars would remain, whispers would continue, but she also knew her voice was stronger. Senator Kennedy's devastating line had momentarily threatened her, but ultimately it became the spark for her comeback. She realized that leadership isn't perfection, it's persistence, redemption, and the courage to rise again. In the years that followed, Jasmine's district transformed, new housing projects opened. Schools flourished, community centers rose. Her name became less about headlines and more about impact. She visited a father whose children now had stable homes, a teacher whose classroom grew full, a young woman inspired to run for office herself. Each visit reminded her that the fight continues, and that every whispered no can become a roar. Senator Kennedy remained in the Senate, and while his line would long be quoted, it no longer defined Jasmine's narrative. In that quiet moment, Jasmine stood on the steps and spoke into her phone camera for her supporters. They tried to define me with one line, but I define myself with 1,000 actions. If you believe you have to stay down after a blow, you're wrong. When you feel broken, remember it means you've been tested. The message resonated beyond politics. It tapped into anyone who'd ever faced a setback. The truth she shared was simple. You may be knocked down, publicly or privately, but you still hold the pen to your story. And sometimes the greatest comeback begins with the harshest fall.